Welcome to a technical elective AMP info session. And what I'm here to try to help you do is get a little bit better feel for what you might want to do in the future. And I'm not sure if you know exactly what the future is going to hold, but at least maybe you can plan out your next year based on what you anticipate needing in 30 years or 40 years. When are you going to retire? In 2050? In 2060? Whew. That sounds like quite a few years from now, but it's going to be on you before you know it. But what I want to do now is try to convince you that maybe while you are here for the next year and a half, that maybe you use that time so that you can be more effective or efficient in your 30 or 40 year working career as an engineer. With that said, I would like to try to think that I'll give you some indication as to how we've tried to organize the technical electives, or the 400, 500, 600 level, actually the 200 and 300 and 100 level courses. They're all trying to be organized into little bins. And that's illustrated, I hope, in this graphic. You know what you've taken in terms of your prerequisite courses, depending on where you're coming from. If you have taken your freshman class, you've taken 175. Oh, that's a 75. 275 as a sophomore. 274. Those are in the 70s. Those are all lining up in the decade of the 70s. Well, what are those related to? Those are what we classify as computer-related classes. 220, that's in a different decade. That's in the 20s. But 220 is a little different than 175, is it not? Probably. I hope you feel like it's a little different. 320 is a little different than 175 or 275. Those are in the decade of the 20s. In the 40s is 340. Well, what do those that are lining up in various columns, the 50s, that's 351, 352. Those are electronics type classes. That's how we've tried to organize our numbering system, but you can see that we soon run out of numbers. The computer engineering discipline was given 20 numbers, and when we introduce a new course, we actually have to give it a unique identifier. That's why these A's, B's, C's come into play. So if we've had many iterations on various classes, like 340, that may have happened in your career here. You may have seen it switch from a 340 to a 340A. That's because it's now different. It's a unique class versus 340. With that said, what I'm trying to tell you is that we've tried to organize, when you see something in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, in those decades, that's in the signals and systems area. And that means that you're thinking about signal processing, control, or communications in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. If you're in the 50s, or if you see something in the 50s, that might be a course that's maybe talking about electronics. So take these organizations with a grain of salt in terms of how we've tried to organize. But if you're wanting to, if somebody says, oh, I'm going to take 462, oh, that's probably a computer type class. And in fact it is. It's computer architecture. So that's how we've tried to organize, but you'll see that maybe we haven't been able to maintain that organization throughout. But in the computer courses for spring of 2019, and this is changing as we speak, I've already changed some things today for spring of 2019. It's a little late in the game, but that's just how things work. Not really related to offerings, just times or different slots. But in the computer courses, If you're interested in that set of classes, you have 4 different classes here in ECE that you could select from. 330B, that could maybe be classified in various categories. Here I've simply lumped it in with the computers. That's a computational techniques. How do you differentiate with numerical techniques? How do you integrate with numerical strategies? What kind of algorithms can you write? Can you now perform some optimization strategies? That's 330B. 462, 562, and the reason why I'm showing both is if you're interested in the AMP, which maybe that's why you're here, is you want to take some 500 level classes during your undergraduate degree program. You don't have to have those be cross or dual numbered. They don't have to be 4/5 something. They could be pure 500s. And even as an undergrad, you can take 500 classes as long as your GPA is okay and you have the approval of the instructor. So if you want to take a 500 level class for undergraduate credit, that's doable as well. But here I'm just showing you that you have several options at your disposal. 462, 562, and another thing to keep in mind with this stacking is probably you want to have those under your belt. Those are probably good prerequisite courses to take if you're now looking at 400, 500 level classes in those decades. Computer architecture obviously requires 369A, and 462, 562 now is looking at computer architecture at a step higher than 369. I know many of you are not challenged by 369. So if you want to be challenged a little bit more, try 462, 562. That now might be dealing with higher level concepts. Now what happens when we have multi-core or parallelism? Something to that effect. That's now 462, 562. What's the architecture? What's modern computer architecture look like? Graphical processing units. Can I understand that? Maybe you, I don't know, maybe you covered that in 369A. You cover a lot in 369A. I was being a little facetious before, but I don't want to discourage you from taking 462, 562. Another class in the computer area technical elective is 471, and that's now network security, or a network security class, cryptography. How do you encode information so that maybe you're reasonably guaranteed or assured that what you're sending isn't going to be compromised between point A and point B? That's 471. If you're interested in artificial intelligence, and if you are an EE, don't assume that you can't take these computer or vice versa. If your option is computer engineering, you can take other technical electives besides these 4 classes that are in the 60s and 70s decades. But artificial intelligence, now how do you build computer algorithms that help you think or strategize or reason? That's now artificial intelligence. The next set, and these are in no particular order, but the next set of classes for spring of 19 that are planned as of today, 352. If you are a CE, you can take, if you're a computer engineering option, you can take 352 as a technical elective. Obviously, if you're in the EE option, you can't take 352 as a technical elective. But that's now device electronics. How do we, or how now can you better understand what's really going on with these devices that you're building from the physics perspective? How do you now describe or analyze diodes, transistors from the basics of the physics behind it? That's device electronics. 407 is digital VLSI. How do you build these systems that you played with maybe in 274, these adders, these inverters? How do you create those or build those with semiconductor techniques? And now you'll be creating those in software, but can you now create big digital systems? That's now 407, 507. 417, 517, have you been around long enough and in the third floor, maybe they don't do it anymore, but they used to instrument themselves. That was before wearables were the thing, but they would build something that was wearable, and now it's monitoring them, and they have to now run up and down the third floor hallway to try to get their pulse up or something changed so that they can measure it physically. But now can you build, how do you put together or measure biomedical signals? Can you now pick up some information from the body? How do you measure that? How do you build it? What are the sort of electrical engineering aspects of that? That's now 417, 517. And that one's maybe even required for biomedical engineering students, so you might want to jump into that quick if you're thinking about trying to get into that class. Yes?
Is it a challenging course from like an electronics, electrical engineering standpoint?
Is it a challenging course? I'm not sure I quite appreciate what you mean. Is it too simple? Is that what you're asking? Kind of,
yeah. If it's not too simple, or
I think that, so the question is, how simple is 417, 517 from a EE perspective? I think it would show you, or maybe give you, practical application of what you've been learning theory from in the classroom. So in that sense, it might actually enhance your understanding of what you've been learning all along. And it might make what you're learning in some of these other classes more meaningful. Now I know and maybe that would help you in an interview. You never know what you're going to be asked in an interview, but typically if you can show some passion, some interest in something that you've done or built in your program or as an undergrad, that goes a long way towards impressing your interviewer. And maybe measuring something on your body might make your description a little bit more passionate, especially if you're not quite understanding the safety implications and you get shocked or something to that effect. You might describe what did or didn't go right with your particular class. Did that help answer that question? I can't answer it because it obviously depends on the student and the class, but I think students that take that find it enjoyable and helpful as a class. In the electromagnetics area, again here, if you're in the computer engineering option, you can take 381A. Okay, I see some heads nodding. I think those heads were nodding in agreement. That 381A is sort of like 369, I believe, in terms of the different options. I shouldn't be saying this, should I? But 381A, if you want to learn Maxwell's equations, if you want to understand electrostatics, magnetostatics, what's going on, how do I think about this, what are these fields, maybe that would actually get you more comfortable with something optical or something in the quantum area, and so it might be helpful actually. And this goes back to my earlier comment. You want to use this year or year and a half of technical electives now, because when you get out and you're having to run or sprint in your job, you may not have the luxury of learning some of these basics or these fundamental concepts, and it might be helpful now. People ask, do we have a power class? Well, hidden in our curriculum is 414A or 514A. It deals with energy systems, but it's from a photovoltaic perspective. But now you are building devices that are trying to capture energy from the sun. And how do you do that efficiently or effectively? What are the limits? You learn those ideas in 414A. 456, optoelectronics, maybe you could think of that as the laser course. How does a laser work? How do I build it? What are some of the characteristics of a laser? How do I change those? What's possible? How do I now interact with something that's both has electrical pieces and optical pieces? That's optoelectronics. And antenna theory, we all touch antennas every day in our smartphones. So how do those antenna get embedded into our devices? How do we build them? What do they do? How do we design better ones so that we can collapse our phone to smaller and smaller form factors? Signals and systems. Spring it used to have 3 different digital classes in the signals and systems. Now we've moved 429, 529 to be in the fall. But in the spring you have digital communications, which is now, as a prerequisite, you need to have 340A. So 340A, Introduction to Communications, is essential to success in 435A. And now you've just stepped it up a notch in terms of what are some of the different ways of designing communication systems digitally. Another class is digital control systems. That's 442, and that is complementary to 441A, which is the analog controls class. You'll see similar things in 442 that you see in 441A. 441A is not a prerequisite, but it would obviously be beneficial if you've had 441A to step into 442. Likewise, if you've had 429, 429 will be beneficial in 442 if you've learned about Z-transforms, sampling theorem, aliasing. Those kinds of those concepts will be useful or applied in the 442 class. Questions on those technical electives that are coming up in the spring. Now, if you're hoping to take all of those, what you may want to do is plan around which ones overlap or don't overlap. And that's what I hope this helps you with. What you're seeing here are the different days of the weeks and the times of the days. And that red is what's changed today. We've now been able to move 381A from 9 a.m. So if you're a non-early riser, you can now take 381 later in the day, 3 o'clock. I think I was told that did go through. So those are, but what I'm trying to say here is if you do see more than one class in a square, then you're going to have to make the choice. Which of these 2 classes do I want? If you don't want either one, you don't have to worry about it. But if you wanted both of them, you're going to have to do some thinking or elimination. That's what this page is for, and hopefully it's somewhat accurate. So, in that sense, you cannot take antenna theory and numerical computations next semester both. You have to decide which one of those 2 you want to take. Questions on what's happening in the spring for technical electives? Then we will move into the fall. And yes?
Would you mention summer at all?
Will I mention summer at all? I just did. Summer. So summer, you can't be too dependent on anything happening in electrical and computer engineering in the summer. We did this last summer offer 2 online classes at the graduate level, but I wouldn't count on things happening at the undergraduate level in the summer.
And then for graduate level, they also have 2?
We haven't yet confirmed that, and right now it's looking like 1 or none, maybe, for the summer. So I would focus mostly on fall and spring for your courses. Now you can take classes outside of ECE, but I'm not going to talk about that necessarily today, but you have up to 3 non-ECE technical electives, do you not? I think that you can take, and that means that you can take 300 and 400 level math, physics, other engineering disciplines for technical elective credit. Again, use those wisely to try to find material or topics that you won't have time to do when you graduate. Yes?
It seems like we're focusing on undergrad courses. Are there grad courses that you're going to mention as well?
Well, I've done 400/500.
It doesn't seem like we have any pure 500.
So I haven't mentioned any of the pure 500 level classes. So I would encourage you to look at this. This is where some of the pure 500 level classes are. For example, here is, I thought, 523. And what is that? Now I've forgotten. I think is that the machine learning class? I think that's the machine learning class. We also have 524. That's cloud computing, I believe. 509, that's something like cloud. That's security, I believe. So there are some pure 500 level classes. 531, that's maybe 531, which is at 4 o'clock to 5:15 on Monday and Wednesday, is software-defined radio. So that's a pure 500 level class that's being offered. A lot of our classes, even though, well, we get more mileage in terms of a department if they're cross-listed, or dual-numbered, I should say. Not cross-listed. We do that also, but they don't do that as much anymore. But dual-numbered. Did that help? So most of the pure 500, we don't have that many, and they're on this particular slide, I believe, if you're wanting to know what's going to be offered. And you have access already, right? Through the U of A, you can find what is actually out there. But in the fall, this is really, right now, we won't pick these tentatively until January 1. Now we're trying to decide what's going to be offered for fall of 19 as we speak. But 369 is computer architecture. If you're an EE and you want to know how your computer is put together in terms of processor, memory, etc., that's a class to take. 373, that's another class that can be taken for technical elective credit if you're an EE option. 411, 511 is somewhat a follow-on to 330B, but this is now numerical modeling of physics systems and biological systems. How do you model these different systems in a computer? 413, 513, a lot of these are being offered this semester, but web development and Internet of Things. We were talking about wearables. How do you interface those with the Internet? That's Internet of Things, or 413, 513. Computer-aided logic design, if you like 274, then this is the follow-on. This is the subsequent class to 274, is 574A. And then computer networks is 478, 578. How do you connect multiple computers together and make them work effectively? In the electronics bio, we have electrical and optical properties of materials in 434. The other one, 415, 515, is taught outside the ECE department. I'm assuming that might be offered, but again, this is quite a bit ahead of us in terms of what is going to be offered, so take these with a little bit of looseness or flexibility in terms of when they might be offered. Electromagnetics and optics courses, we have 381A, again for CE option, and then microwave engineering passive circuits. In the microwave frequency range, how do you design passive circuits or filters, different transducers in that microwave frequency range? Yes. Do I know who will be teaching that? No, I think routinely it has been taught by Dr. Melda, but it might be Dr. Shin. I don't know. That probably won't be known until August. But right now, it's probably going to be put on the books, but I don't know who will be teaching it. In the decades of the signals and systems, the 20s, 30s, and 40s, you have the DSP class. How do you create digital filters? How do you generate an output signal given some input signal that's digital? 430, 530, optical communications. That's usually taught out of the optical sciences department, but now that's a different way of communicating versus the 435 and 340 strategies. And then there's automatic control systems, which is 441A and 541A for the fall. And again, we have what has occurred this semester happening for next fall. And if you're planning, look for non-overlap to occur in all of your desired technical elective courses, meaning you can't take, and here I may have extra ones thrown in here, but you can't take like 630, well, I don't know why I have the 369 labs on there, but I do. You couldn't take 533 and 581A, for example. But I've tried to make it so that you can have a wide selection of courses. You could take random processes 503 at 11 o'clock on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and that's a pure 500 level class. You could also take 501B, which just finished. It's at 4 to 5:15 on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. No, on Monday, Wednesday, not on Friday. Questions on the fall list? Maybe you're all here for the AMP. So what is the AMP? Well, it's a pretty good deal, actually. If you qualify, you need to have a cumulative undergraduate GPA of 3.3. You don't have to take the GRE exam, the graduate record exam. So that saves you a little money and maybe a little stress. But you apply for this ideally in your junior year after you've accumulated, or when you now have 75 units. So if you now have 75 units, you can apply. You can't start taking classes to count towards your undergraduate and graduate until you're a true senior, which is 70 plus units. So you need to be a senior in order to be taking these classes that will count towards both your undergraduate and graduate degree programs. What that means, the reason why it's called the Accelerated Master's Program, is you now are able to basically double count. You can count up to 4 classes towards both your BS and your MS degree. Which means if you take 4 classes as an undergraduate that you're also counting towards your master's, you just need 6 more classes at the graduate level to complete your MS. You could also potentially sign up for the AMP and take a job and now complete your MS coursework remotely online, or if you're local to Tucson, you could still maybe come to campus. You don't have to stay on campus or agree to be here that one more year, you could maybe spread it out a little bit and obtain your master's degree in a longer length of time, but now you're hopefully gainfully employed during that time frame. So you need to be a senior or have 90 units of credit. You can count up to 12 units. You don't have to take 12. You could take 2 classes, meaning maybe 6 units, but that still reduces the number. For your master's degree, if it's non-thesis, you're looking at 10 3-unit classes to obtain your master's. And if you now have 4 of those already finished by the time you finish your BS, now to make this happen, you have to maintain that 3.3 cumulative GPA. If you slide below, you'll graduate with your BS, but you won't be able to pull those 4 classes in and count them towards your MS degree. If you're interested in this, I would say that you should really make an appointment with our graduate advisor, Tammy Whalen, and that you can access by simply sending her an email at gradadvisor at, and now I don't know if it's ECE or email, but if it's not one of those, it's probably the other. But you can now send her an email and set up an appointment and talk and see what do you need to do or how can you accomplish or get into the AMP program if you're interested. Questions on the AMP or technical electives? I don't want to keep you here very long or all night. Yes? So you can take 500 level classes for undergraduate credit if you satisfy the prerequisites, meaning you have to have a certain GPA and you need to have the approval of the instructor. You can take 500 level classes just as an undergrad, or you can be thinking about doing that with your AMP program.
Is there like a special paper we have to sign up?
Yes, so you have to have a particular piece of paper filled out and submitted. That's, I think, the paper that needs the instructor's signature to make that happen. So hopefully one of the undergraduate advisors would be able to help you with that. I don't know who that undergraduate advisor is. Yes?
Do you know what's the GPA requirement to do that? To take master's classes?
I knew once I started saying that. I think does anyone else know? Is it 3.0 or better? Check that out.
I like that answer.
So it may be bigger than that. And now I'm wondering if it's larger than that. So we'd have to verify that. I would have to look that up to see what the GPA needs to be before you can take a grad. It might be 3.5. I don't know. That's a pretty big change from 3 to 3.5. So I don't know what the GPA requirement is, but I believe there is a GPA requirement for you to take a 500 level class as an undergrad. They really want you to be successful. And typically graduate classes are a little bit more challenging than undergraduate classes. Other questions? Yes?
What is the difference between thesis and non-thesis option for the master's?
What's the difference between thesis option and non-thesis option? You can do the thesis option in the AMP program. I didn't mention that. The thesis option is you now use 6 of those units, of those 30 units, towards your thesis. Thesis is some research that you and a faculty member agree to pursue and finish, and then you write it up. You have a thesis document that documents your research work or activity. That amounts to 6 units of credit. It's typically more. If you think at an undergraduate level, maybe a 3-unit class is representative of 150 hours over the course of a semester. Probably at the graduate level, a 3-unit class might be 200 or 250. So let's say it's 250. A thesis is probably more than 500 hours. It's probably more than two 250s. But that said, some people want to do that if you want the thesis. I've talked to some companies, and a lot of companies are not that, they don't really differentiate between a student that has a thesis option or a non-thesis option at the graduate level for an MS. It might be good learning for your PhD, but you can also go into our PhD program without completing a master's if you score high enough, or if you enter at a high enough bar. You can be directly admitted into the PhD program. But that's what a thesis is. On a non-thesis, obviously you don't do that. You just take 2 more classes. You take 10 overall classes. If you're in the thesis option, you take 8 classes and then 6 units of thesis. Did that answer your question? I probably really oversold that thesis option. But not as many students are pursuing that now that we have the non-thesis option. Other questions? Yes. Is there a deadline for applying to the AMP? There's a deadline in that you would want to do it to optimally take advantage of it. You could do it with 1 semester left of your senior year and maybe take 1 or 2 or 3 graduate level classes. But obviously you need to apply before you graduate. The minimum time is you have to be at 75 units to apply, and you can only start taking classes when you're a senior or when you have 90 units. Those are the sort of the minimum bars. But after that, if you haven't graduated and you still have a semester, if you can get admitted and sign up for the classes, you could take those in your last semester. You could sign up for the AMP. You don't have to do it exactly when you hit 90. Other questions? If not, I will quit talking, especially on the recording.